All right, so we're going to start tonight with the Israel-Palestine story with the Wall Street Journal, which I expect to be tainted heavily towards the American view, the Zionist view, if you will. Then we're going to hear from Mehdi Hassan, who had a fantastic interview with an Israeli official. So this is context. We are reading from the Wall Street Journal. What's behind the escalating Israeli and Palestinian conflict? Confrontation sparked by tensions old and new threatens to deepen the region's turmoil. Let's watch their video. This is footage from airstrikes in Gaza. A Hamas commander has indeed been killed. That has been confirmed by Hamas. Insane footage. The IDF says it was targeting Hamas buildings, but they did indeed hit civilian targets. We found out from a report by the UN in 2014 that 80% of the casualties in that conflict, in the previous conflict, in the years before 2014, 80% turned out to be civilian casualties. Palestinian Health Ministry officials say the Israeli air campaign has killed at least 65 people since Monday. At least 7 Israelis have died in intense Hamas rocket barrages that began Monday evening. We know at least 7 of the 65 were children. At least.
כולל את מח"ט עזה וגם מפקדים אחרים, וזו רק ההתחלה. אנחנו נכה בהם מכות.
So this is Benjamin Netanyahu saying this is just the beginning. We will strike them with hits they did not dream of.
שהם לא חלמו עליהם.
I want to just take a minute to discuss
This
what's
is the
happening
U.S. Secretary of State.
in the West Bank and Gaza. We're deeply concerned about what we're seeing there. Images that came out overnight are harrowing, and the loss of any civilian life is a tragedy.
So these are Hamas rockets. Or they call that the Iron Dome or whatever it is. Their anti-missile defense system. This is in Gaza. The most severe airstrike since 2014, according to the Wall Street Journal. Clashes between Palestinians and Israeli police in the contested city of Jerusalem have escalated, with Israelis striking scores of targets in Gaza. Now, Israeli settlements in the West Bank are not internationally recognized. Israel is in violation of international law. Let's make that perfectly clear. So contested city is a weird way of saying that. With Israel striking scores of targets in Gaza in response to hundreds of rockets that were launched by Palestinian militants. So far, 56 Palestinians, including 14 children. I said at least 7, 14 children. And 7 Israelis, including 1 child, have died in the fighting. The confrontation, sparked by tensions old and new, threatens to deepen the region's turmoil. A full-blown war could force the U.S. to shift attention to the Middle East when it has been focused on Russia, China, and battling the coronavirus. Jerusalem has experienced its worst violence in years, with Palestinians and Israeli police clashing. We saw the video yesterday. The Israeli police were clearly antagonistic towards the Palestinian people. Tensions rose sharply over a looming Israeli Supreme Court decision on whether to uphold the eviction, it's not an eviction, eviction applies. They have the authority. They do not. To uphold the eviction of Palestinian families from their homes in the strategically situated Sheikh Jarrah. Hundreds of Palestinians have been injured in the clashes, with police using flash grenades, tear gas, and sponge-tipped bullets. Sponge-tipped bullets? I believe it was rubber-tipped bullets, and those sponge-tipped is a weird way to say that. Rubber bullets definitely cause internal injuries. They're not like little bee stings. More than 20 Israeli police have been injured. Compound where the mosque is located, known to Muslims as the Noble Sanctuary and as the Temple Mount to Jews, has become a focal point of Palestinian anger over what they see as years of efforts to push them out of Jerusalem and limit their access to land they claim. Rubber-coated steel, exactly. Thank you, that's a more accurate description. I was trying to remember, we read a story last night and it described it like that, I think. Rubber-coated steel. I was trying to think of that term. The Palestinians are also claiming that they are infringing on their basic rights. They are! Right-wing Israeli efforts to assert control in East Jerusalem, which Israel claims as part of its undivided capital, have inflamed the situation. Monday was especially tense as young right-wing Israelis participated in marches associated with Jerusalem Day, meant to commemorate Israel's capture of East Jerusalem in 1967. Now, basically, the Jews think they have claim to the land from like the biblical sense from back in goddamn Moses days. After the fall of the Ottoman Empire, it was Palestine. The British Empire owned a chunk of the fucking land, helped create the Jewish state following World War II. And ever since then, Israel has been taking over more and more and more of the Palestinian land to where it's pretty much not Palestinian land anymore. Now that is a complete oversimplification of what's going on in a very, very complex situation. But I think I summed it up pretty good. That's a whole nother. I just wanted to talk about the tensions between the Palestinians and the Israelis. You add in the whole Christians who think that helping the Jews take over the land ushers in the apocalypse. And that's the reason why the U.S. has been on a very specific side of this conflict. And you get this powder keg that we're sitting on right now. Not to mention the fact that Israel has become this huge tourist destination for dumb fuck baby boom Christians. And the Israeli people fucking love their money. So thanks to the power of the evangelical coalition in this country, funneling money, the U.S. government, I think it's something like $1 billion a year they give to Israel. Of course the United States is on the side of ushering in the apocalypse. Of course. All right, so continuing on with the Wall Street Journal article. Why are Israel and Gaza ruler Hamas? They got to throw Hamas in there. And that's another thing that really. Now, Hamas is the name of the organization that has power in Palestine. What power you can have? The Palestinian Authority. There used to be a thing called the Palestinian Authority. That's Hamas now. That coalition dissolved. I don't know about dissolved. It might still exist somehow. Hamas began firing rockets towards Israel on Monday evening after the militant group. I don't really know if you can call them a militant group anymore. Issued an ultimatum to Israel police forces to leave the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I'm sure I butchered that. and other areas in the contested city or else face attacks. The cross-border clashes are the worst since 2014, with Hamas sending hundreds of rockets toward central Israel. Because I might be mistaken on this, but I think the way they resolved things in 2014 was to recognize Hamas as an actual authority. Or that happened sometime after the ceasefire in 2014. Some of the first rockets were aimed at Jerusalem, which Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said was a red line. Since Monday evening, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad have launched more than 1,000 rockets towards Israel, which has responded with aerial attacks that the Palestinian medical services say have killed 56 people, including 14 children. And once again, they're just fucking lobbing missiles at a fucking air defense system that's gonna just knock them down. Israel says it has killed dozens of operatives of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Gaza's second largest militant group. 6 Israelis, including 1 child, have died in rocket attacks, and 1 soldier was killed by an anti-tank missile. Hamas, the de facto ruler of the Gaza Strip since it seized control in 2007, says it will continue to fight until Israel changes course in Jerusalem. Israel says it wants Hamas, which the U.S. and other Western countries consider a terrorist group, to get the message that it won't accept attacks on its citizens and cities. All right, so let's move on to Mehdi Hassan, who's going to have a fantastic interview here with Israeli embassy spokesperson Elad Strohmeyer.
Joining me now is Elad Strohmeyer, spokesperson for the Israeli embassy here in the United States. Thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. Given 500 Palestinian children were killed in the 2014 Gaza war, according to both the UN and human rights groups, how worried should we be tonight that Israel is about to launch another full-scale assault, maybe an invasion of Gaza?
I haven't watched much of Mehdi Hassan's show, but I'm very familiar with his work at The Intercept. Wow, right out of the gate. Fantastic question.
Thank you, Mehdi, for inviting me. I think the question you're asking is something to refer to Hamas spokespeople, because eventually the reality on the ground is that quiet will be responded by quiet.
Sounds like victim blaming to me.
Threaten Israeli civilians, firing rockets indiscriminately towards Israeli towns. Then we're going to be forced to respond and respond forcefully. And by the way, this is not just Israel. Any country in the world would have done the same if their cities were attacked under constant attack by rockets by terrorist organizations.
That smirk by Mehdi.
I mean, any country in the world, most countries in the world are not in charge of a decades-long military occupation. But you mentioned Hamas rocket strikes. I think we can both agree.
Although we're seeing an apartheid state.
Civilian buildings is wrong. Can we both agree on that? I think we can agree on that, right? That's common ground for us.
Hamas firing rockets at civilian population is totally wrong. There is fully agreement with us on that.
Agreed. You got me on. We're 100%. We agree. And yet today you had a 13-story residential apartment building in Gaza targeted by the Israeli Air Force destroyed. How is that not anything other than a war crime, a deliberate attack on a civilian target?
You know, I think it's actually very disfortunate that people are trying to equate the IDF response to Hamas as a terrorist organization. Israel acts in accordance with the international law. We target only Hamas targets, and every target that we're firing at is being chosen very carefully. We do that with accordance of international law in order.
He keeps saying that, but
civilian casualties and collateral damage. And
I don't think they have much regard for international law.
The only organization, the only ones in the Middle East that actually care about international law. Hamas doesn't care. Palestinian Islamic Jihad doesn't care, and every loss of life is unfortunate. I agree 100%.
You flattened. I mean, we don't have time to get into an argument about international law. Suffice to say that most human rights groups criticize Israel for violating human rights law, and they criticize Hamas. But you leveled an apartment building. I think you gave them a 1-hour warning to get out of the building. You think that's in line with humanitarian law to bomb a civilian apartment building in Gaza?
You know, Hamas is using the Palestinians in Gaza as human shields. They're
What?
firing rockets at Israel from within centers of civilian population because they want to see these sites. They want to force Israel to respond and to see these sites. Now, also, Hamas and the Palestinian authorities are exaggerating with.
Why are you hitting yourself? Why are you hitting yourself?
About the casualties and the children that were killed. And
I guess why are you hitting yourself?
Of IDF strikes, but we know for a fact that 6 of these children, for example, were killed.
The first time it was me
Hamas
holding your
rockets
fist.
Were misfired and fell in within the Gaza Strip, and they killed the Palestinians. So I'm taking any report coming from
just to be clear, I just want to be clear here, Elad. I just want us to be clear. Let's find common ground. Are we now saying, is your position, because I'm sure militant groups are listening in from across the world, is your position that apartment buildings are fair game if there's someone inside you don't like? Is that the position of the Israeli government tonight?
You know, you say that you don't want to go into international law, but the question that you're asking is exactly a question of international law. It's a question of what is a legitimate target.
It's a simple question. Are apartment buildings okay to bomb? Because I'm sure Hamas will say that.
If it's a military target, then it's a legitimate strike. If Hamas is using the target in order to hide weapons, in order to use it as a commanding...
So we can just call anything...
But you said you don't want to go there, so...
a military site.
Okay, I mean, it was an apartment building with hundreds of families and you told them to leave, so you knew there were families in there. Gaza, of course, has erupted because of what's happened in East Jerusalem with the expulsions of Palestinian residents. Hold on, let me ask my question. Let me ask my question, then you can respond. Your government says what's happening...
Even his hair is smug!
...real estate dispute, even though under international law, the United Nations UN Resolution 478, which even Ronald Reagan didn't veto, makes it very clear that the world does not recognize Israel's occupation or annexation of East Jerusalem. In fact, UN officials said on Friday that your government could be guilty of possible war crimes in East Jerusalem under the Geneva Conventions as an occupier transferring its own population into occupied territory.
Huh, weird timing, isn't it?
These lies being perpetuated toward Israel is old and they're not new. And the reality is that we're a law-abiding country.
Wow.
And right now, the dispute in Sheikh Jarrah, in East Jerusalem, is something that is being discussed in the Israeli courts. It's not yet totally decided. And what we have tried to do is actually to de-escalate the situation on the ground. And it was supposed to be discussed today in the Supreme Court, which is the highest abiding law in Israel, and we have asked the Supreme Court to postpone it because we wanted to de-escalate the tension on the ground. But the reality is this is not
that's
just
the Israeli...
Everybody is trying to escalate the situation. The Palestinian Authority, Hamas, is igniting the situation and trying to prevent any solution to the problem on the ground.
Okay. You made that point. You say you're a law-abiding country. I put UN Resolution 478 up on screen, passed in 1980, which the Reagan administration did not veto, which says that your occupation and annexation of East Jerusalem is illegal under international law. 14 UN Security Council members voted for it. That's not...
He says fake news. That's all. Fake news, motherfucker.
Human Rights Watch, Bet Salem, which is an Israeli human rights group.
Trump card, Mehdi.
Accused Israel for the first time of the crime of apartheid. And I know you vigorously reject that description, of the discrimination that Palestinians endure. But how would you describe these quotes from the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, Aria King, a settler leader who told the New York Times on Friday that these evictions are, quote, of course part of a wider strategy of installing layers of Jews, his words, throughout East Jerusalem. So, okay, it's not apartheid. What would you call that?
So, you know, the deputy mayor of Jerusalem is a politician from different politician parties. I speak for the government. The question is, who does he speak for? And there are different opinions in Israel with different thoughts about how to approach that. And the reality is that you're trying to make the Sheikh Jarrah a dispute of 5 families that needs to be resolved. I'm not undermining 5-6 families that needs to be resolved is the core of the issue. And this is not the core
I can resolve it. It's their land. Shut the fuck up. Leave them alone.
The issue. The core of the issue is that they have deeds that prove that they own the land, and there were compromises being offered to the families who live there, and they refused to those compromises because they were incited by the Palestinian authorities because they wanted us to get to where we are today.
If we're going to get...
And now that we're trying...
No. He's saying we offered them money for the thing that we say we have a deed for. Why would you feel the need to offer them money if your deed was valid?
If we're going to get into
for a Supreme Court ruling on that to see what's going to happen with that.
Understood. But if we're going to get into
the legal,
if we're going to get into,
but you're
hold on.
going to that legal. Maybe, if I may, I want to say something.
Hold on. If we're going to get into property deeds, Elad, let me ask a question. Elad, you answered. If you're going to get into property deeds, if you're going to get into, hold on. We're almost out of time. If we're going to get into property deeds, I'm sure there's a fair few thousands of Palestinian families who have property deeds and keys which are not being honored by the Israelis. But you say he's just a deputy mayor. I mean, that's an elected official. Another deputy mayor of Jerusalem, Fleur Hassan Nahum, told the Times, quote, "This is a Jewish country. There's only one. And of course, there are laws that some people may consider as favoring Jews. It's a Jewish state." Again, you say apartheid is a wrong description. How would you describe such language from two deputy mayors elected, two deputy mayors of Jerusalem? Two deputy mayors.
You say we don't have time, but you're taking what she said, for example, I assume, out of context. Because Israel is a Jewish state and is the national homeland of all Jews, but every minority and every group enjoy equal rights under the law.
That's not what she said, Elad. She said some laws favor Jews. That's not what the quote says, Elad. She talks about some laws favoring Jews and says that's the right thing to do. Would you condemn that language? You say you don't speak for these deputy mayors. Would you, as an Israeli government official, condemn Israeli officials who talk about some laws favoring Jews, putting layers of Jews in East Jerusalem? You can condemn it tonight.
Condemn it. Come on.
Would you?
Mehdi, what I want to do is to condemn everyone who's trying to flare a very fragile and a very sensitive place.
Well, that's you.
Extremists from the right in Israel are trying to do, extremists from the right in the Palestinian Authority, extremists from the left. Everybody is trying to do that, and we need to try and find a way to de-escalate that. The Israeli government has done everything that we can to de-escalate it in act of Ramadan, in act of Jerusalem Day.
Everything they can to de-escalate it, like, launch attacks.
And I want to say one more thing because you said we're about to run out of time.
Hold on. No, you're giving, I'm letting you give very long answers. We're out of time. One last quick question. You talk about de-escalation. That's hundreds of Palestinians in hospital tonight might disagree with that description. But opposition to the Israeli government is growing in the U.S. You just heard Congresswoman Betty McCollum talking about her bill to prevent U.S. taxpayer dollars from being spent in the occupied territories. Even your own former ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer, said over the weekend that Israel should prioritize the passionate and unequivocal support of evangelical Christians over that of American Jews, who he said are disproportionately among our critics. That's a pretty damning admission, isn't it?
The Jews in the U.S. are against... It's the evangelical Christians that support them. Very damning admission.
I'm not going to comment of my former boss who have high appreciation towards him, but I will tell you, as an Israeli official who speaks to you on an official capacity right now, the Jewish community is very important for us, and we're working tirelessly to work with both sides of the Jewish community, liberals and conservative, and also non-Jewish communities. Evangelical Christians is one of them, but not only. African American.
How about giving rights to Palestinians? At least. Well, giving them their state back.
All the fabrics of the American society.
And we're totally out of time. So one last question. Yes or no? I can only take a yes or no. You speak for the Israeli government. Does the Israeli government support a two-state solution?
We promised under the Trump peace plan to keep the path for a Palestinian statehood open, and this is the policy of the Israeli government.
So not a yes. Elad Strohmeyer, thank you so much for your time tonight. I appreciate it.
Wow. I mean, Sam Cedar said yesterday, is like, the time for a two-state solution has passed. It's a one-state solution, and that just like, I was stunned. I'm like, fuck, he might be right about that. And that's what Israel wanted. That was the goal all along with the settlements.